Aldric's cell. An old king sits defeated, his wrists heavy with chains. The distant roar of a crowd reaches his ears. But these are not the cheers of adoration he once knew. They once shouted his name in victory. Now they shout it in anger. In flashes, we see a city ablaze, soldiers turning their blades on their own, a golden crown tumbling onto the cold stone floor. To understand his fall, we must see how karma keeps its accounts, and how a debt once created is always paid in full. Years earlier, Aldric was a brilliant but deeply insecure general, serving a kind and aging king. The king treated him like a son, entrusting him with the kingdom's entire army. During one of their walks in the royal gardens, the old king placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Power, my boy, only lasts when it's used to protect, not to steal." But Aldric looked at the peaceful, prosperous kingdom and saw only weakness. He secretly believed the realm was too slow, too soft. In his heart, he was convinced that only fear, sharp and absolute, could forge true loyalty. He saw the king's kindness not as a strength, but as a flaw waiting to be exploited. His first opportunity came when a neighboring lord, chafing under a minor tax dispute, began plotting a small rebellion. The king, ever hopeful for peace, sent Aldric to negotiate. But Aldric saw a different path. He met the lord in secret, not with offers of peace, but with a treacherous proposal. He promised the lord protection and future rewards in exchange for his support in a future coup. Then he returned to the king with a fabricated story of betrayal, painting the lord as a warmonger and convincing the council that a swift, brutal war was the only solution. The rebellion was crushed with merciless efficiency. The lord was executed, and Aldric was hailed as a hero, the savior of the kingdom. The truth, however, remained buried beneath the battlefield, a dark seed planted in the soil. With his reputation soaring, Aldric's ambition grew bolder. Rumors of his cruelty on the battlefield began to whisper through the court, but they were dismissed as the grumblings of the defeated. He was untouchable, a rising star. During the grand annual festival of harvest, as the kingdom celebrated its prosperity, Aldric made his final move. With a steady hand, he slipped a colorless poison into the old king's wine goblet, then raised his own in a toast to the monarch's health. The king collapsed, and chaos erupted. Aldric, with masterful deception, immediately framed foreign assassins, whipping the court into a frenzy of fear and confusion. The frightened council, desperate for a strong leader, turned to the one man who seemed to have all the answers. They begged Aldric to take the throne and lead them. He accepted the crown with perfectly feigned tears, vowing, "I will avenge our beloved king." He believed history remembers only the victors, not the crimes they commit to get there. As king, Aldric ruled exactly as he had always intended, with an iron fist. He levied crushing taxes to fund his lavish court and ever-growing army. He forced citizens into labor to build grand monuments to his own glory. Public punishments became a common spectacle, designed to instill terror and obedience. The very same villages he had once saved now starved under his reign. The mothers who had once cheered his name now whispered his crimes to their children as grim bedtime stories. It was then that a mysterious, hooded storyteller began to appear in town squares and marketplaces. He traveled from village to village, telling a simple but powerful tale about a treacherous general who poisoned his own king to steal a crown. The story spread like wildfire, repeated by children in their games, sung as a haunting ballad by minstrels. Slowly but surely, The lie that built Aldric's throne began to crumble in the hearts of his people. Karma's clock was ticking. A severe drought struck the land, withering crops and drying up rivers. The people pleaded for relief, for the release of grain from the royal stores. But Aldric hoarded the food for his palace and his soldiers, leaving his subjects to starve. This was the final straw. His most loyal commander, a man he had personally mentored in the art of ruthless pragmatism, watched the growing unrest and began to think, if he could take the crown through betrayal, why can't I? He saw an opportunity. Using Aldric's own methods, he secretly gathered the hungry soldiers and enraged villagers. He used fear of starvation and the promise of justice to forge a new alliance. On the night Aldric was celebrating the 10th anniversary of his reign, a feast of opulence within the palace walls, the city gates were opened from the inside. Soldiers who had once sworn loyalty to him turned their swords, their voices rising in a chillingly familiar chant. For the good of the kingdom, Aldric was captured without a fight, his own guards turning against him. He was dragged through the streets and thrown into the deepest, darkest dungeon in the Capitola prison he himself had built for those he called traitors. Outside, the new ruler, his former commander, gave rousing speeches about freedom, justice, and a new era of prosperity. But in his eyes, the same cold, hungry ambition burned. One evening, the hooded storyteller appeared at Aldric's cell. As he lowered his hood, Aldric recognized the face of the old king's most trusted advisor, a man who had vanished after the coup. The old advisor looked at the broken king and said softly, "You didn't just rewrite history, Aldric. You taught the world how to betray you. Every lesson in cruelty you gave was a lesson in how to bring you down." In the darkness of his cell, listening to the cheers for a new king, Aldric finally understood. His entire reign had been a masterclass in treachery, and his students had learned well. Every act of cruelty, every broken promise, had not just built his kingdom, it had trained others to do the exact same to him. Karma doesn't hurry. It walks beside us, learning from every choice we make. What you teach the world is what returns to you. If this story made you think about your own choices, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs this reminder. And if you want more powerful life lesson stories like this, hit subscribe and join the Fiction Saga family today.